Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and build your master translator playbook. You know all that complex, highly technical knowledge you have rattling around in your head? Well, today, we're going to figure out exactly how to turn that into engaging content that literally anyone can understand. It's an absolutely critical skill, and it all starts with your audience.
The source text hits us right up front with this brilliant foundational premise. Would you talk rocket science to a 6-year-old? I mean, probably not, right? It sounds totally obvious. Yet a lack of audience analysis is actually the root cause of most terrible technical documents out there. Think about those frustrating instruction manuals we've all struggled with at some point. Failing to understand who is actually reading your work is the absolute biggest trap professionals fall into when they share information.
So here is our cognitive roadmap for the explainer. We're going to break this down into 4 really straightforward steps. Who is your audience? Analyzing their needs and backgrounds. 3 vital message controls. And finally, translating complex technical concepts.
All right, step 1. Who is your audience? We really need to nail down exactly who we're talking to here, because in the real world, it's almost never just one type of person. Think about a company like Apple for a second. You basically have 4 main groups with wildly different motivations. First, you've got your experts. They know the theory and the product inside out. Think of someone like legendary designer Sir Jonathan Ive. Then you have technicians. They're the ones building, operating, and maintaining the tech, like an Apple-certified tech. Next up, executives. These folks are making the big business and economic calls on the stuff the experts design, like Tim Cook. And finally, the non-specialists. These are the everyday MacBook users who just want to get a task done or are simply curious, and they have the least technical knowledge of the whole bunch.
And here's how that multiple audience scenario actually breaks down in practice. 60% non-specialists, 30% executives, and only 10% experts. This is exactly why you can't just write for one single demographic. You might draft a document that's going to be scrutinized by engineers, rubber-stamped by executives, and then handed over the regular everyday people to actually use. Once you've figured out the overarching category, we move to step 2, analyzing needs and backgrounds. This is where we dig a little deeper into those reader profiles.
You've got to look at what they already know. What are their specific expectations? Even basic demographics like age or residence come into play. You have to ask yourself a pretty tough question. Do they actually need background information? Like, if you're writing a guide for Windows, do they already know the basics? If you just assume they know absolutely nothing and explain every tiny little detail, you're going to hike up the page count, add to the cost, and run the risk of intensely frustrating your experienced users. It is a really delicate balancing act.
So when you're facing all these widely variable audiences, whatever you do not write to the lowest common denominator. That approach just creates this cumbersome, tedious document that's going to turn off the vast majority of your readers. Instead, focus on the majority. Keep that core group engaged, and just use cross-references or appendices for those absolute beginners so they don't get left behind. Okay, so how do we actually adapt our text? The source gives us Section 3, 3 vital message controls. Think of these 3 things, information, structure, and design, as your complete adaptation toolkit. This is how you make sure your readers never get lost in the weeds. Let's start with information control. This is all about curating the exact right content. You want to give them the key stuff, definitions, the crucial steps, but actively omit the unnecessary theory. If someone is reading basic operating instructions, they really don't want a lesson on the underlying physics of the machine, right? That just frustrates them. You also need to adjust the technical level and write incredibly strong introductions. Giving them that big picture overview right up front and using relatable everyday examples, that's an absolute game changer for non-specialists. Next up is structure control. This means chopping out the fussy details and reorganizing things. Instead of dropping a massive lore dump right at the start of a chapter, just feed them chunks of background info exactly when they need it. Strengthen your transitions with words like therefore or however so the logic flows. Stick to active verbs and use direct you phrasing to make it feel immediate. Oh, and structurally, keep your sentences to an average of 15 to 25 words and chunk your text into short 6 to 8 line paragraphs so your reader can actually catch their breath. Finally, we have design control. Nobody wants to be intimidated by a dense, terrifying wall of text. Throw in some subheadings, use vertical lists, maybe pull the margins in a bit to make the line shorter, and use a larger, friendlier font size. Honestly, it completely changes the psychological experience of reading. It proves that these seemingly petty formatting details add up to massive readability gains.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, translating complex technical concepts. Let's look at some of the rapid-fire, sentence-level tactics you can use.
Since so much technical writing is aimed at non-specialists, your job is basically to be a professional translator. Think of this checklist as a toolkit you're handing to your audience to make up for their lack of knowledge. Define unfamiliar terms immediately. Elaborate on processes. Give descriptive, concrete details. Show them real-world applications, and take a moment to explain why this topic is actually important to their lives.
Let's look at one of the best techniques in action: comparing things to the familiar. The source gives us this fantastic quote. In appearance, a flu virus somewhat resembles the medieval mace, a ball of iron studded with spikes. I mean, how good is that? It perfectly illustrates the power of comparing abstract concepts to everyday things. It takes a microscopic virus and makes it instantly terrifying and completely understandable.
Here's another amazing tool: elaborating the process. Imagine a vague reference saying, "A dashboard graphically projects hazards." It's kind of sketchy, right? But what if we elaborate step by step? We explain that an infrared detector searches for warm objects, an X-ray unit checks for metal to tell cars from wildlife, and then a computer plots yellow or red dots on the screen. Boom! Elaborating the mechanics turns a vague feature into a crystal clear story.
Now we absolutely have to talk about sentence length. Picture one massive, jargon-stuffed sentence about extracting subsurface water with a dual-scanning spectrophotometer. It causes immediate cognitive overload. But if you take that exact same scientific process and break it down into 6 short, punchy sentences, it instantly becomes so much more digestible.
The source also highlights this brilliant little counterintuitive trick called the in other words technique. It's basically just posing a rhetorical question directly to the reader. You don't actually want an answer, you're just using the question to spark their curiosity, transition smoothly into a new section, or just give them a mental pause. It's an amazing way to snap their attention back right when they might be drifting off.
And here's a really vital difference between creative writing and technical writing. Consistency is way more important than variety. If you call it a hard drive in paragraph 1, don't suddenly start calling it a DASD in paragraph 4. Stick to your keywords. In technical writing, you actually want to repeat words exactly. Trying to be fancy by varying your vocabulary will literally just confuse people trying to track a complex subject.
So, we've covered a massive amount of ground today, from identifying your audience to sentence-level translation tactics. I want you to keep this playbook in your back pocket. The next time you sit down to draft an email or a presentation or a report, I want you to stop and ask yourself, who are you really writing for? Are you truly translating your knowledge to empower them, or are you just talking rocket science to a 6-year-old?